What is up, everybody? Welcome to Destination the Show, episode 53. It is Wednesday, October 2nd. As always, I'm Jamie Cameron, joined by Jeremy Nygaard. Jeremy, this is the first time I've spoken to you since the last time we were sat here doing this. How the hell are you, man?
I'm good. I was looking at these AFL rosters a little bit, and I've watched so little baseball since the Twins, started to suck eons ago. My
Seems
my
like
my
such a long time.
yeah, my youngest just was asking today, like, well, when do the Twins play in the playoffs? Like, he was confused by the fact that they're
Sad
not
trombone.
playing anymore.
Wah,
Yeah,
wah.
so um, and the Brewers were going to be the team that gave us something to do, and that appears to be short lived as well. So I guess it's just cheer for the. Do you cheer for the AL Central, or do you cheer for the Yankees? Like, this is not
No, no. I can't get on board with that.
I have to come back from behind the scenes just to say you never cheer for the Yankees. It's for all the whoever beats the Yankees and then whatever you want there. Never cheer for the Yankees, Jeremy.
well, that's fine. So are we? Is it who do the Yankees get to play?
They are playing the Royals? Tigers?
So I
I
feel
don't
like the
even know
Royals.
the bracket. This is how uninvested I am. It's sad. Um, well, Yankees play the Royals, Tigers play the Guardians. So
So
here's
I
my
feel like
root.
the
Go
Royals
ahead.
are the least unlikable of that group, right?
You mean the most likable?
Yeah, but I'm not liking any of these teams. So we're on the
I
scale of
okay.
unlikable.
In the grand scope of ranking them on the AL side, I would go from most preferred to least preferred. Royals number one, Tigers number two, Guardians number three, Yankees number four.
Fair,
I
me
can't
too.
bring myself to root for the Yankees pretty much under any
Yeah.
circumstance.
So we'll root for a team that has very little organizational talent besides Bobby Witt, and
Yeah. Hey man, they made it in. What
it's
about
true.
the other side? Do you have any National League rooting interests? Um, let's like make some assumptions here for a second. The Brewers are behind right now, which is just like, God, why do the Brewers just not show up for the playoffs? Just like the Orioles. The Brewers are behind. The Braves are behind. So let's assume for a second that it's Dodgers, Padres in one NL divisional matchup, which makes the other one, um, what is it
Mets
going to be?
and
Mets and
Mets and
Phillies. Mets and Phillies and Dodgers, Padres are two pretty exciting series, I got to say. Who's your rooting interest on that side?
um, Padres,
Yeah,
Phillies, Mets, Dodgers.
sure. I get on board
Only
with that.
because only because at the very beginning of the year I was like, I'm taking the Padres to win the West. Theo should do a little deep dive into those projections and see who
No,
is
Theo should
closest.
not do a deep dive into those projections. Because
I
I
didn't have
want
the
to.
Phillies in. I did not have the Phillies in. You guys
Okay,
made fun of me for not having the Phillies in.
the Brewers are tied up. I believe I picked Seattle to go to the World Series and play the Braves. So that was a long time ago before Ronald Acuna's injury and Spencer Strider off the year and all that good stuff. All right. Well, you covered my rooting interests in the playoffs. Do you feel any more embittered about the Twins' miserable end to the season, based on the fact that two other AL Central teams, who I think you could make an argument don't have as much organizational talent, certainly not the Royals, um, are now on these kind of mini October runs? Does that make it worse, or you kind of tune it out after the Twins are done?
Yeah, well, I mean, typically I
You
would
tune
tune.
you tune it out no matter what because you don't have a life anymore. But
Yeah, well, that's the thing. I, I would have, I would be done as soon as the Twins are done, and then I would like follow, who won. Oh, great. Who's in the World Series? Anybody worth watching? So like when Garv was in the World Series, that was worth watching, right?
mm-hmm.
Um, and if those games are good, like I'll follow, or at least I used to follow close enough on Twitter that I could at least know if a game was worth turning on. So that's kind of where I'm at. The games are usually on at my house. Like the game is definitely on right now, but wasn't really watching.
Background noise. But also, like it is worth just like touching on this for a moment before we talk about the Twins coaching staff changes. You have in like the last month become a complete recluse from your family, from your friends, from society. Just to give people an idea, there was a period of time over the summer where you and I would text probably multiple times daily,
That's
just like
correct.
back and forth, whatever about baseball, the draft, EA, college football, whatever. The over under on the number of characters I get from you on a weekly basis via text now is 3.5. It's are you good for the podcast tonight? Yes. And that is and then I
Yeah.
see you if you're here, and then that's it till next week.
So I thought you'd set it at 2.5 because it's either
Sure,
yes or no.
Sure, fair.
Yeah, and so the other thing that adds to the busyness is that I'm trying to coach middle school football too.
Good Lord.
And so that's actually we've actually played a little bit better here in the last couple of weeks, which is more fun. And we running clocked a team last night that beat us last year, so
nice.
That was good too. But yeah, I mean that's it's like wake up, get to the bus garage, go to school, get home, try to stay awake, and then fall asleep. So this is like late for me.
I have a quick aside on sports/kid side stuff that I want to tell you about.
Okay.
Which is that as a parent, if there's anyone listening here who has little kids or like kids who are entering sports ages, you do not know nerves until you have watched your kid compete in a gymnastics meet, which I did for the first time this past weekend. And I was fully watching from behind, like closed fingers, extremely stressful. Absolutely hated it, and have to do it about 6 more times over the next 8 weeks.
So it was your oldest, and it was her first gymnastics competition.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I feel like that'll ease up as we move forward.
If I don't make it back in a couple of weeks, that's why. Thoroughly stressful. Okay, one last random note that I want to talk about before we jump into the AFL, because this is an AFL episode. Arizona Fall League rosters are out. We're going to jump into Brewers, Cubs, Twins, do a quick overview of each squad here. Today, it was confirmed that the Twins essentially turned over their entire hitting staff, right? So three coaches plus assistant bench coach gone off the back of the epic collapse. And I think, obviously one of the things that was easy to point to was the offensive inconsistency of this unbelievably barren patch at the beginning of the season, and then this last 6 weeks of absolute misery where they couldn't score runs. Does that satisfy you? Do you think that's the right move? Is that like big moves based on what you're expecting? Because I remember we talked last week, dude, and you're like, I'm not expecting like big firings like Rocco or this or that. I'm curious whether it falls in line with your expectations, whether you think it like materially kind of means something as they move forwards into next season.
Yeah, so basically it's like ownership's not going to change. To the general manager, president, that level, that's not going to change. Mm-hmm. Rocco's not going to get fired.
Yep.
Players can't get fired, and so there's only one group in between, and that's the group that we saw let go today. So it was the hitting coach, the other hitting coach, the assistant hitting coach, and then Diaz, like everybody but the base coaches and the bench coach, essentially.
Well, Mackey's back too, right? So I think you should. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting to me that the hitting side was targeted. I think it's easier. I guess it's easier to make excuses for the pitching side, given that you are running 3/5 of a rookie rotation by the end of the year. And you can point, I think, a lot to acquisitions the front office made for the bullpen being, just whiffs, period, right? Okert, whiff, Jay Jackson, whiff, the list goes on and on. But I'm curious whether it means there will be any kind of difference in their offensive like approach or philosophy next season. I think like cleaning house completely maybe leaves the door open for that, but I also think that's probably directed from higher up than the hitting coaches. So
Right. And I mean, I don't know how much like a philosophy can change. You have guys that strike out a lot, right? And so unless it's going to be like, okay, we're going to go back to trying to hit the ball on the ground and run it out, which drove everybody absolutely bonkers. What's going to change? I mean, the players aren't changing. The like I think there's a pretty we could forecast what the starting lineup is going to look like next year and be relatively close. We know who's going to catch. We know who's going to play shortstop. We know who's going to play center. We know that Wallner's going to be in a corner. We know that Lewis is going to probably be a third.
I feel a lot less confident in a lot of these things as you're walking through them than I would have if you had walked me through this lineup in July. Like Lewis, that's like
Jeffers and Vasquez are going to be the catchers, right?
Unless they salary dump Vasquez and or Paddock, any of the higher priced veteran guys, depending on
Kepler's gone, so it's going to be Larnach and Buxton and Wallner in the outfield, right? With a little bit of Castro sprinkled in. And then you're going to have some combination of Lewis, Correa, Julian, Miranda, Lee, with a little bit of Castro sprinkled in.
Wait, so question about Castro though. His R projection is $6.5 million. Any chance the Twins non-tender him because he's too expensive?
I feel like there's trade value at that price. I would be more likely to see that, and it's going to be one of those dumb Kyle Farmer-ish trades if they make a deal like that. I don't think they would not tender him at that price. They tendered Kyle Farmer at a similar price, who's not nearly as valuable.
Yeah.
But I think there's Austin Martin who can be Willie Castro light for a fraction of that. And if that's what they're looking to do with today's, who knows what's going to happen with the TV revenue.
Good times.
It's going to be ugly, and that's what's kind of nuts. Like they've jacked prices. People are left with a bad taste in their mouth after a fall that not many people were watching anyway. People weren't going to the game. People can't watch it on TV, and so it's kind of a weird time, and it's a chance for ownership. And is Castro making like $36 million this year? Did I see?
Who?
Or not Correa making like $36 million.
I was like, Castro is definitely not making $36 million. Yeah, it's upwards of 30. Certainly, it's what 30, 33, somewhere in that range. Okay. Theo says 37.3. Wowzers.
So that's a ton of money, and so you're gonna just have all these guys be leaned into that are low cost, and the Royce Lewis comment about the cheap guys. That's another thing that just isn't going to sit well over the winter for a lot of people. So it's going to be an interesting winter, but it's really not because the Twins aren't going to do anything until like February, and you'll lose your mind on a weekly basis, and I'll just be like, "Yeah, I told you so."
Good times. I'm glad we're going to get back into that pattern. Let's not go down that rabbit hole any further, right? Because I feel like we could spend 45 minutes talking about that and be done. We will have all winter to ruminate on what the Twins are going to do, not going to do, all of that good stuff. Let's jump into the AFL because the Arizona Fall League rosters came out this week. And we'll spend a little time with guest appearances from your dog breaking down rosters here. I think we should start with like my question for you always, because I feel like you're someone who knows like the history of all of these things really well. Like tell us about the Arizona Fall League. What is the purpose of it? Like what's the whole kind of setup?
So it's kind of evolved here over the last handful of years. What the AFL used to be was kind of the last stop for a lot of guys that were on their way to the major leagues. and it was a lot of really not necessarily the highest rated prospects, but higher regarded prospects that most of the time were pretty much 40-man locks. That it was kind of like that final step before
Finishing school.
Yeah, yeah. And so it's since COVID, it's kind of changed, and I think it's it's what teams are doing with their players over the winter, and also with the reduced rosters. It's more of an evaluation time now than it is these are the guys that we know that we have, and we want to do this. So what you see a lot of now is kind of like fringe prospect guys that maybe the teams didn't get full evaluations on, or prospects that missed time. And I think all of that it kind of plays into this. You have less guys to evaluate. Roster spots are more valuable, and so it's important to know kind of where these guys sit, and you don't want to I think expose players maybe to situations if you know that they're going to be prospects for you, right? Where you'll maybe slow play them a little bit more in a more controlled environment than when you send them and have other people coach your guys. And then it's like, well, if they're not great, maybe they were guys that they'll really kind of set themselves up the next spring to either make a team or just be let go. And so the rosters, I think, in totality are just less exciting because you're not going to see those studs. Like like the Bryce Harpers and the Mike Trouts that played in the Arizona Fall League. You're just not going to see those guys because the teams are going to protect them a little bit more. And they kind of know their path, and the AFL is not necessarily that path anymore.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And so let's talk quickly just about an overview. I think you made a ton of great points there, especially about kind of how the purposes transition for a lot of organizations, right? By MLB Pipeline's list, there are 14 top 100 prospects headed to the AFL. A lot of them, like you mentioned, right? Folks who missed time, folks who maybe had a down year. But you also have, I think, some cases of folks outside of that. So like Jack Caglianone is going for the Royals. That seems maybe a little bit unusual given that he just got off like his biggest grind of a season ever, right? And there doesn't seem like a ton of motivation there unless they're trying to really get him moving. Another guy I would point to is like maybe a little bit more of that kind of form of purpose that you spoke to of like finishing schools, like Bryce Eldridge, who had just an absolutely monster year for the Giants organization. He was a 2023 draftee, but he's up to, I think he's all the way up to AAA now. First base only, but just ridiculously productive. But then, yeah, I think when we start digging into the Brewers, Cubs, and Twins rosters, depending on the organization, it can read a little bit disappointing or deflating. So, okay, Brewers win 5-3, so we do have baseball tomorrow. Thank goodness for that. So we should quickly talk about like how the teams are organized, right? So there's 6 teams, and essentially what they do is package organizations together to send, like 6 or 7 or 8 guys from their org to make up a team. So for example, this year, Twins prospects are going to Salt River, along with Diamondbacks, Nationals, Rockies, and Yankees. The Brewers prospects are going to Peoria with the Braves, Mariners, Marlins, and Padres. And then the Cubs prospects are going to Mesa with the Angels, Athletics, Rays, and Red Sox. And so teams will send a selection of hitters from their org, a selection of position players from their org, and then the staff will also be made up of guys from each of those kind of organizations. So let's go ahead and start jumping into rosters here. Now, how we'll kind of go about this is do a little bit of an overview of just like listing off the guys, and then we'll highlight maybe the 3 kind of most famous prospects or notable guys for each organization. And then I'm going to bomb you, Jeremy, with some questions on your thoughts of like, does this roster excite you? Here's a guy, like, who's the guy that you're most excited to see? Maybe it's our guy flying under the radar and so on and so forth. So let's start with the Brewers. Brewers sending their prospects to Peoria. They're sending Brock Wilken, their number 7 prospect, Luis Lara, their number 16 prospect. These are all rankings courtesy of Pipeline. Second baseman, third baseman Juan Baez, right-handed pitcher Coleman Crowe, right-handed pitcher Ryan Burchard, right-handed pitcher Will Childers, left-handed pitcher Mark Manfredi, and right-handed pitcher Nick Merkel. So I guess we should talk quickly about a couple of the guys on their roster. Brock Wilken, probably the most notable / famous of those guys. I was staggered, Jeremy. Have you seen Wilken's numbers this season? I had not checked on them recently. Check out this slash line. 199, 312, 363 on the season. Now he did miss time. I think it was a fractured cheekbone, possibly. 675 OPS, struck out 28% of the time, walked 12, 69, close to 70% contact rate, and a expected WOBA of right around 300. Does that surprise you? Wilkins' kind of output and numbers on the season. He played saw most of his time at AA for the Brewers org. That was a shocking update while I was combing through all of this today.
Yeah, not a great season. And anytime you get hit in the face, I think it kind of changes your mentality. And so, to me, this assignment is a little bit of let's change the scenery. Let's start where your line is 0-0-0, right? Instead of where you're looking at, you look up at the scoreboard and you see your batting average continue to drop, and try to give him some confidence going into a season where he's going to have to repeat, right? And so I think that's why you do this. I think we're both pretty high on him coming off last season, and so this would give him an opportunity to hopefully have a little bit of success, kind of hit the reset button, and kind of the new reason that teams would send a guy like Wilken to the AFL is to make up some of these lost plate appearances.
Yeah, and I don't honestly, and maybe you disagree. I'm still decently high on Wilken. I think there's numbers around his approach. Like obviously his strikeout rate is a little bit high. He gets on base at a decent, like the walk rate is decent. The contact rate is not abysmal. I don't think there's that many major red flags, assuming that he either hits the ground running in the AFL or picks it up at the beginning of the 2025 season with some time and space away from the injury. So I'm still decently high on Wilken. And I think that's a great example of what you spoke to in your kind of opening kind of notes about the AFL, right? Like well thought of prospects who had a poor season, try and get them back on track and finish on a high. Luis Lara, the next guy I want to talk to you about. If I'm remembering right, Jeremy, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, I feel like you out of us, you have always been the guy who's like, I don't get it. Luis Lara, do not understand it. Don't get what the hype is about. Maybe am I misspeaking?
I like Luis Lara. I think
that's me. Great. Well, the numbers back up my perspective and not yours. You'll be disappointed to learn. So here's the numbers from 2024. Hit 245, 332, 327. So good on base, not a lot in the way of slug. That's good for 659 OPS. Struck out only 15.7% of the time. Really great. Walked 8.4% of the time. That's fine. Really good bat to ball skills. A contact percentage north of 80%. 298 expected WOBA. The other number that jumped out to me, 082 ISO, just like so little kind of extra base impact, right? And so good bat to ball skills, but the quality of the contact is not very exciting for Lara. Any reason that I love that I projected my not loving Luis Lara as a prospect onto you. Any of this do anything to change your mind about his outlook? Any concern about just like the lack of kind of power or extra base impact in that profile, or still feeling pretty solid on him?
Well, no, I think whenever you have a season like this, you wonder, right? Because as you move up the ladder, when you struggle, and he doesn't hit for power. He's tiny, and that's the part where, I mean, we look at the heights and weights that are given to us. Jorge Polanco was the same thing too. Like the scouting report on him when he was 16, 17, 18 years old is that a hard fastball would literally knock the bat out of his hand, right? And so it's got to be other stuff, how projectable he might be, and I don't, I haven't watched enough to know if that's something that when Lar gets on base, he's a problem, right? He stole 45 bases, and so that you can always use speed. And again, it's another thing where it's like, okay, send him there, see if you can have some different eyes on him where all of a sudden something might click. And he's not hitting for power, but at 19 years old and 5'8" and 155 pounds, you don't know what that's going to be. Now, for me, it would be okay. Now we're going to work on diet. We're going to work on weight room. We're going to work on these types of things, and we're going to do it under our supervision. Sending him, to me, that's like, okay, well, they must want something else there. But I think there's still hope, right? With a 19-year-old,
for sure.
And it wasn't like he didn't hit for power, but he did get on base. How much of that was a product of speed? There's enough to think, yeah, we'll give it another shot. But again, this might be for him. Let's go change of scenery and see what'll happen. But I still think there's enough there to. I mean, he's ranked 16th. That's probably a fair drop in that system,
for sure.
But to still think of him as a prospect,
for sure. I can get aboard with that. Yeah, last guy I would highlight as a kind of notable for the Brewers, Ryan Burchard. This is Ryan Burchard, right-handed pitcher. This is clearly just a making up for lost time play. He missed April through July with injury. Only managed to pitch 18.1 innings in 2024. Struck out a really healthy 27.5% of hitters, but he also walked 22% of hitters. So just needs reps, man. Just needs innings. Just needs clean innings. Get back on the wagon and get a healthy run at the end of the season. Overall thoughts, Jeremy, on the Brewers group? Anyone else you're kind of interested to see from this group? How do you feel about it? Does this group kind of excite you as an AFL contingent? What are your kind of summary thoughts here?
No, I think you highlighted the right guys. Wilkin would have been more exciting coming off last year than in this year. But I think he's the guy that all eyes will be on. And Lara too. Pitchers are just hard because you never know how much the team wants them to pitch. But the hitters should get regular at bat. So I want to see what Brock Wilkin is. And in an organization like this, the Brewers are loaded with corner infield type players.
Yep.
So even though Brock Wilkin was the first round pick last year, he can get swallowed up in that depth where maybe he's not even, he drops even further. And they've had younger guys that have made impact. So I think it's a big, I'm not going to say it's necessarily a big opportunity for him to put his name back on the map, but I think if he struggles, you start to wonder a little bit, because that's the level, right? AA is the level where you kind of separate the men from the boys. So this is a big year for him where Lara's younger and will still have opportunities to progress.
Yeah, fair enough. Okay, let's move on to the Cubs. Cubs are sending their prospects to Mesa. Quick overview of the roster. I want to say there's another guy who wasn't maybe your favorite, but I could just be making stuff up at this point. Moises Ballesteros, catcher, first baseman, number 4 Cubs prospect at this point, number 41 in the MLB Pipeline Top 100. We'll talk a good deal about him in a second. Benjamin Cowles, an infielder, Cubs number 30. Grant Kipp, right-handed pitcher. Jonathan Long, listed as first baseman here. Shane Marshall, right-handed pitcher. Aaron Perry, right-handed pitcher. Vince Riley, Luis Rojano, and Sam Thorson, all right-handed pitchers. So I want to start with Ballesteros. Here's a scouting phrase that I enjoy because I think it's a little bit silly, is people will say about guys, that's just what they look like, like meaning like a starting pitcher who's like 6'5", 230, and just kind of like looks the part of a MLB starting pitcher. Moises Ballesteros is the opposite of that. He is not at all what they look like. He is 5'7", 195. Just doesn't really look like much of an athlete, but an absolutely incredible 2024 season. He had 289, 354, 471. That's good for an 826 OPS, 19 home runs, 35 extra base hits overall. He's now at AAA. Struck out just 18% of the time, walked 10% of the time. That's okay. 76% contact rate, very nice. 345 expected WOBA, 104.5 mile per hour at 90th percentile exit velocity. That's really solid. He does chase a lot, but just someone who really catapulted himself up the Cubs organizational rankings and certainly into top 100 and even top 50 kind of global prospect consideration. So does Moises Ballesteros, Jeremy, qualify as a one of those more old school kind of AFL allocations of like, this is kind of finishing school for a guy, right? Because he ended the season at AAA. Where he's going to play at the major league level, I'm not 100% sure, because I think the reports on the defense are not strong. I do not think he's maybe destined to be a solid defensive catcher. But do you think he falls into that bucket that you outlined off the top of the show of like, oh, wow, he's like close to being ready. Let's just kind of push him over the finish line here.
Yeah, I think that's for sure where he fits. And he's listed as a first baseman. Like when on his MLB page, like assigned to Mesa or wherever as a first baseman. And so that's what this is here. Like, you've caught how we feel as an organization is, I mean, he caught 72 games this year, and he played first base in 8. And so this is kind of that chance for them to give him a different look. And I don't know where he fits. Like, I haven't looked. I don't believe he's on the 40-man. I would guess that this is the 40-man season for him. So it's a little bit of a, teams sometimes have different approaches to how they're going to fill that 40-man roster. If they have guys where that's like, maybe this could inflate some trade value. And I think that's kind of what the Cubs did last year. And they had guys that worked out in the AFL. So I think he's a good prospect. Obviously, he's one of the better or higher ranked prospects that we're going to see in the AFL, and has a chance to be a big league player this year. And there's not a ton of these types of players in the league. So good on the Cubs for sending him. And I think first base is what he's going to spend most of his time doing.
Yep. Two other Cubs guys I want to highlight, and these are certainly two names that I think have flown a little bit under the radar just kind of globally in 2024, Benjamin Cowles and Jonathan Long. They're both listed as third basemen, and we'll kind of couch them together because I think somewhere on the infield, right, is where they're going to play, and the production levels for both are really similar. So Benjamin Cowles, third baseman, a little bit older. He's 24 at AA. He was originally a 10th round pick by the Yankees in 2021. He hit 286, 372, 457 at 829 OPS with 37 extra base hits. Maybe not a ton of home run power. Struck out 17% of the time, walked 10%. Solid contact, really good expected WOBA for him. And then Jonathan Long, pardon me, listed as the third baseman, 22 years old, again at AA. He was a 2023 ninth rounder out of Long Beach State. He hit 283, 391, 461, even better than Cowles for 851 OPS, 17 home runs, 38 extra base hits, struck out 20% of the time, walked 14% of the time. Both of these profiles were a little bit Luke Keeschel-ish to me, other than age being the separator. Certainly for Jonathan Long, maybe a little bit more home run pop there, but just both really good all-round skill sets. And one thing that it made me wonder, and I'm curious for your take on this, right, is the Cubs have Isaac Paredes locked in at third base for next year. Do you think there's any validity to using the AFL as kind of like window shopping for other organizations for prospects that might be, flying a little bit down the radar, a little bit less famous in your organization before they start making off-season moves? What are your thoughts on potentially one of these guys being, eventual trade bait? Because those are two super productive seasons.
Yeah, Long was the name that stuck out to me because I remember him being the power profile. And like I've told you a number of times, when I look at the stats and when he went to Double-A and played 46 games, walked 35 times, struck out 33 times, still hit for power. So when he has a 5.28 slug with more walks than strikeouts, that to me is something that it's like, okay, let's take notice of that.
Yep.
And that was Double-A, and so we're getting closer. Is he a first baseman? Is he a third baseman? He played some left field. But I think that the bat is a bat that can profile in a corner. And is there room in a corner in this organization? I don't think so. Never hurts to have depth, and I think they'll obviously have some time to make a real decision on him because he was just drafted last year.
Mm-hmm.
But he's a name that I think you could see him start to move up some boards just because he's been productive. He's done it now over a handful of levels. He's got to Double-A. And if he goes to the AFL and turns some heads, it's going to be like Triantos was last year, where it's like, okay, we have a little bit more than what we thought we had. And he worked his way, because I think we felt that way about Triantos being trade bait, and it was like, nope, he's too good. Works in top 100. And that's what you want out of players. That's why you send them there for their value to go up.
Yep, and that really panned out that way with Triantos. Like, again, using Pipeline's rankings, he's their number 5 guy now. I think Long is like criminally underranked at 30, personally. And I think to double down on a point you made there, this is 2024 was his first full professional season. He was only drafted in 2023. Unbelievably impressive season, and as you say, kept the production going in Double-A. That is a major box checked for him. If you're comparing Cubs and Brewers rosters, is one more exciting than the other? Any kind of major reflections on the Cubs crew? I've found this roster a little bit more exciting for me than maybe the Brewers group.
Yeah, I mean there's a better prospect on the top, and I think there's more. The fringe prospects are even more exciting too.
Mm-hmm.
And I think maybe what goes without saying for us is that we really like a lot of guys in the Cubs system, or excuse me, the Brewer system, and they're not on the list. Like, there's a lot of options of guys that would have been like, oh yeah, that's fun. Even though the Cubs and Brewers they both have very good pipelines.
Mm-hmm.
I just think there were some missed opportunities with the Brewers, and feel less so about the Cubs because those guys are a little bit higher up in the pecking order already.
For sure. One future episode that we need to do when we have someone who works for an organization or a front office on is get some insights into how they think about which prospects to send to the AFL, because it fascinates me. Let's move on to the Twins. Last but not least, maybe least based on the level of intrigue around the roster, I think Twins are sending their prospects to Salt River. You have Kalai Rosario, outfielder, their 20th prospect per pipeline. Danny DeAndrade, shortstop, their 22nd prospect. Cade Bragg, left-handed pitcher. Jacob King, right-handed pitcher. Devin Kirby, right-handed pitcher. Jackson Noble, right-handed pitcher. And Ben Ross, an infielder who spent most of his 2024 at Double-A. So let's dig into a couple of these dudes. I think it's fair to say that the Twins have largely leveraged guys who miss time to fill up their roster more than anything else. And so I know there are people clamoring for maybe a Walker Jenkins or an Emmanuel Rodriguez. Alas, he re-injured his same thumb at the end of the AAA season. So the Twins roster, I think, despite them having a really awesome year in the minor league system, is a little bit lacking kind of name recognition. But let's start with Rosario. He's at AA currently, 22 years old, a 2020 draftee, a prep draftee out of Hawaii. Only played 69 games this season. Not so nice due to injury. He hit 238, 329, 428. 10 home runs and 30 extra base hits in 69 games. Struck out just south of 30%, walked 11%, 71.6% contact rate. Only swung 37% of the time. Expected WOBA of 331. Why I'm bringing up that 37% swing rate is he is a poor man's Emmanuel Rodriguez. A little bit of a similar profile. A lot of power. Some bat to ball questions, although Rosario actually improved his contact numbers in 2024. Curious what you make of him. Do you think because those are at least solid, right? Numbers at AA. What is that OPS? That's like a 750. That's like right around a solid average OPS. What do you think of Rosario as a prospect? Do you think he can be a major leaguer? Curious because we haven't talked much about him, particularly with him having been injured for the vast majority of 2024. Any hot takes on Rosario?
Yeah, I don't think he's. I think he'll be in conversations when he has like hot stretches, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know that his prospect status will ever be as high as it was last year, right? He's league
home run champ.
Comes out, gets hurt, goes to AA, and his numbers at AA, it's not that they were horrible. They weren't great. And it seems, even though he was a 2020 draft pick, it seems like he's been around forever and just hasn't really been able to kick in the door at any level. He had a good year at Cedar Rapids, but just this is an opportunity to just kind of extend his season and get him back on track. If I had to bet, I would say he doesn't ever make the major leagues, but because he's right-handed hitter, right? I think there's an opportunity for him there, but it's like Severino, right? Where does he fit?
Interesting comp. Yeah.
Is he good enough?
I don't think the defense is not good. The
right.
outfield defense is not good.
Right. So the profile of what he's going to have to do as a hitter versus what he can possibly do, it's just there's not enough there for me. And I think this is just the Twins saying, okay, we're going to take a look. You're going to go back to AA. And if he kind of fizzles out, it wouldn't shock me. But sometimes guys can really have things click. And after a poor season at AA or a season lost to injury, I mean, you have that, and you see it actually more frequently than you maybe would think. I wouldn't bet on it because I was never real sold on him in the first place.
Yeah, I'm not going to bet on it either, but I'm going to take a very slightly more optimistic view than you, which is to say I won't be surprised if he puts it together a little more, where I think we're assuming here that he's going to at least start next year at AA, given how interrupted his 2024 was. I think there's enough to like about his power, level of production despite limited playing time, and he's not old for the level yet, even though, as you say, he's been around for a while. That I'm going to kick the can down the road on the Rosario kind of long-term evaluation until next season, because I think there's still some promise there. Let's talk about the next guy. We've actually talked about him a little bit in recent weeks. Danny Andrade, another guy whose just season was absolutely wrecked through injury, only played 29 games. Played all of 2023 at Fort Myers. I think the plan was to play all of 2024 at Cedar Rapids. Known to be an excellent defender at shortstop. He only had 29 games, but he hit 243, 333, 359. Good for a 693 OPS. Good bat to ball skills. Doesn't strike out a whole lot. Doesn't walk a whole lot either. Um, Kind of a bummer. I think that he was one of the more notable Twins guys who just missed pretty much an entire season due to injury. And any thoughts on DeAndrade? How do you like him as a prospect? And are you kind of assuming that he's going to be back in Cedar Rapids next year in order to, like he needs to show some success there before moving on up to Wichita?
Yeah, I think I'm probably higher on DeAndrade than. I mean, I'm definitely higher on him than Rosario, and maybe higher on him than most would be. I think I had him at around the top 10 at one point in my prospect rankings. I think you send him to the AFL, and if he performs really well, then you can feel confident in bumping him up to AA. And I think that was probably the plan. Like if you had a, what's the plan of, if he doesn't, go crazy or perform crazy poorly, like what's kind of the middle avenue? And I think it would be a year at each of these levels, get him up to AA in 2025. And that's kind of the level that the Arizona Fall League is. And so if he can go there and hold his own, I think the organization would be like, yep, we'll move him up. He didn't need all those at bats. And he's been pretty stable. Like if you look at his statistics over the course of his whole career, they're not, I mean, it's like this instead of like this. And so even in the 9-game sample, I mean, his batting average was very similar to his career average. His on-base percentage was very similar to his career on-base percentage. Slugging, I mean, they're all within like a handful of points or his OPS was a little bit lower because his on-base and his slugging were just a little bit lower. But I think if you can get in the groove and, he hit 11 home runs in 2023, only had 2 in 2024. You just want to get him some more plate appearances. But I think it's very much a possibility that he's starting shortstop in Wichita next year.
Love it. That's an aggressive prediction. I dig it. Okay, one more Twins guy I quickly want to cover with you, then we'll knock out a couple of questions, get out of here. I think this was one of your guys that you were kind of intrigued by that I picked out here. It's going to be Cade Bragg, left-handed pitcher, 23 years old. We're going to test my draft knowledge right now. I want to say he was a 17th round pick in 2023. San Angelo State, maybe. It was a small Texas school.
17th round.
Okay, so he's kind of undersized, right? Like 6'1", 190 he's listed at. I didn't even put his season numbers in because he was so limited through injury, but he has an interesting profile despite being kind of that undersized kind of frame. It's a fastball up to 94 miles an hour. It's a really good shape. It's not coming from a high slot. It's not a low slot, but it's not a super high slot, but like really good. Gets good induced vertical break on the fastball. He also throws a two-seamer with good horizontal movement, has a slider that's solid, and then his changeup looks really, really, really strong. He really kills spin on it well. And that averages that changeup 14 inches of horizontal break. So it just looks like an absolutely nasty pitch. And he was a name that jumped out to me immediately, although one of the maybe the less well-known guys in a roster full of less well-known guys as potentially one of those arms that the Twins kind of unearth that maybe he's not a starter long-term, but he has a solid kind of arsenal of 4 pitches. He has good shapes on 2 or 3 of his pitches already. He hasn't seen a lot of innings, and he might be a guy that I think potentially pops in 2025. What are your thoughts on Bragg? I think he was someone you liked coming out.
Yeah, I did. I liked him a lot coming out of the draft. And it's a 17th round pick. It's a dart throw, and so I was really curious to see how he would perform this year. And he only got 6 appearances in the Florida State League, and I think this is an opportunity for him to get a little bit more of an extended look. But again, it's so hard to project how much these pitchers are going to throw.
Yeah.
And a lot of times, I think teams would just prefer to keep them under their own eyes. So I do like this opportunity for him. It's going to be a jump, but when I look at all the pitchers, it's like Jacob King, has thrown 2 1/3 inning over 2 years. He's 23 years old. Like,
Mhm.
are the Twins sending him because they like what they see out of him? Like, he was a name where I'm like, I'm not even sure who this guy is, right?
Yeah.
Devin Kirby, 25 years old, threw 38 innings this year, struck out 51, but that was in the rookie league and single A Fort Myers. And so, is this a guy that the Twins think, hey, maybe he's got something, let's expose him to some higher level stuff? And then Jack Noble was really good at 24 in the Florida State League. And
Mhm.
so it's this weird variety of pitchers, kind of, pick your own background. And so it wouldn't shock me if one of them really shined bright in the AFL. It also wouldn't
Mhm.
shock me if you don't really hear about any of these guys after this year. And the last name that's there is Ben Ross, who was a 5th round pick in 2022, played his whole year at Wichita, was healthy, wasn't very good. Like, how was he the guy that was picked to go there? Like, what the heck? That doesn't make any sense.
Yep. I do also have I do have a difficult time kind of following the Twins like logic model, right? Of what are the criteria here in order to get you here because into the AFL roster, right? Because for the hitters, you clearly have 2 guys in Rosario and Andrade that are at least like solid, average, or slightly above organizational prospects who missed a ton of time this season. That makes a ton of sense to me. Ross, not really. I think he is looking like a kind of organizational depth prospect, like at best, like super utility type guy. And then the pitchers, as you say, there's kind of a combo of like guys who miss time through injury, but also guys that are kind of old, significantly old for their level. And maybe that's just protecting young arms, but certainly something I'm really curious about and would like to hear and learn more about the decision making process for. Okay, are you ready, Jeremy? I'm gonna hit you with a couple of listener questions we got before we call it a day, and get out of here.
Can I just say that I think the Twins is the most boring roster that we talked
Oh,
about?
I assumed that you felt that way, and so I didn't even bother to ask you.
Okay. It's important that I say that on the record.
Yes. Okay. We've got 2 questions. Both of these from Dwight. One, I think, is it's easy to have like a fairly strong opinion of, and one is going to be complete conjecture. So I'm going to give you the most difficult one first. Answer this, Jeremy. When will we see Matt Cantorino pitch again?
I'm going to say spring training, right?
Yeah.
I don't know exactly. I mean, he missed the whole year. And so I think I don't know. Was it a surgical thing that he had? Did we ever hear? Was it shoulder? Was it elbow? It was definitely arm related.
I think it was shoulder.
And so my guess is that they'll try to ramp him up when spring training rolls around, and he's going to pitch. And if he's not healthy, he's going to end up on the voluntary retired list, and we'll never hear from him again. But I think all reports in the spring were that he looked good. So I think they're going to give him every chance they can until the arm just basically, figuratively falls off.
I just want to say this about Matt Cantorino. I really hope he gets a chance of a 6-month stretch of good arm health, because he was pitching in spring and looked really good and looked really dominant. And Lord knows the Twins bullpen needs guys who have good stuff to pitch in relief. And so he's just had such a tremendously bad run of luck with injuries. Seems like by all accounts he's an awesome dude. And so really hope Matt Cantorino gets a chance to come into spring healthy, to start his season in St. Paul or wherever it may be, and get a shot to pitch in the majors. Really want that for him. And then last but not least, I'm really interested for your opinion here, Jeremy. Where would you start Connor Prelip in 2025? Would you start him at AA? Is it likely he reaches AAA next year? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think given how aggressive they were with him, so he was drafted in 2023, pitched very little, pitched 6 innings.
Mhm.
In 2024, started the year um, and was injured pretty quickly. Pitched 1 game in the FCL, 1 game in the FSL, and then finished the season throwing 19 innings
Mhm.
in Cedar Rapids, and struck out 32 in 19 innings and throw some nasty stuff. So I don't think it's a matter of like the quality of his stuff as
Mhm.
far as where he should start. It's a matter of health. And so maybe the reason that you don't start him at Cedar Rapids is because you want to keep him closer to Fort Myers and it's
Warmth.
warmer.
Yeah.
And so it's like, okay, well, I don't think you start him at Cedar Rapids. Um, could you keep him around in spring training and warm the arm up? He's thrown, what is he at, 30 career innings in the minors, but he's
Well,
thrown significantly more under the watchful eye of the Twins. And so
mhm.
I think Double A makes a lot of sense. Wouldn't shock me if he made it to Triple A, because as far as arm talent goes, he's at the, if not at the very, very top, he's very close to the very, very top in the organization. And so you don't know how many bullets that arm has to throw. And so I think we could see the Twins being very aggressive with him just because his stuff is that good.
Yeah. Let's talk about Prelip's performance real quick because I agree with everything you said, and I think it's worth doubling down on for a second. I do think they'll start him at Double A. He was overwhelming hitters at Cedar Rapids at the end of last season whilst learning how to pitch again. Right. And there were times at the beginning of that chunk of time there where I think he looked completely dominant and times where it maybe looked a little messy, which I think is normal coming back from a second Tommy John surgery.
Yep.
I just want to roll through a couple of his numbers that I think tell you all you need to know. Right. So 21.1 innings pitched, as you say, 2.95 ERA, 1.02 FIP. If you want to go K per nine and be old school, it's 14.77 Ks per nine and just 2.95 walks per nine. His slider and his changeup are both nasty pitches. I think he was up to like 96, 97 on the fastball from the left side. And so I agree. I think they will be aggressive. I think there's no reason not to be. That stuff is going to do very well at Wichita. The one thing I would say is they're going to treat him like a reliever in that he will be on strict pitch counts next year, just like he was this year. I think it was like 30 or 35 roughly at a time that he threw for Cedar Rapids. I would expect that to be like maybe 45, 50 at the beginning of next season. And then they slowly work up an increase from there, assuming good health. But I think, let's put it this way. If Connor Prelip has a completely healthy 2025 season, I would be extremely surprised if he wasn't in St. Paul by the end of that season.
100%.
If he can stay on the mound, he'll be there.
Yep. And judging on how the Twins have handled pitchers lately, right? Zebby Matthews, I wouldn't necessarily put that as the ceiling either, because
playoff bullpen 2025, baby.
Well, his stuff is better, right? His stuff is better than Zebby's. His stuff is better than Lewis's. His stuff is better than anybody that the Twins have in the minor leagues. It's just you haven't seen it because it's the health. So yeah, I wouldn't put a ceiling on AAA. I would definitely say if he has a really good season, then he'll definitely be in AAA. But I would think that, as soon as things line up for him, there's going to be talk with him and with the Twins, and it could all go south with another arm injury, or you lose that release point and you start walking guys. But there was reason that he was talked about as a potential first overall pick before he blew up, and it's because there's that amount of talent, but the reason that he dropped to 48th is because there was a ton of risk, and we've seen exactly how that works. Like even at the combine when he came back and threw, he was nasty.
Yep. Dude, that's one of the first times I've ever been that late in a draft, and it was only the second round where the Twins pick was up, and everyone in unison was yelling at their TV, take Connor Prelip, and they did.
Yep.
So it's like great. The only time that's ever happened outside of Walker Jenkins at 5.
Yeah, no, it was a good. I'll say it. I mean, people are like, "Oh, he's a bust." I'm like, no, I still love that pick, and let's see what happens. And if it never works out, he's like 80% of the other pitching prospects, right? But I mean, there's a chance that he could be something that the Twins haven't had in a long, long, long time.
Mm-hmm. All right, let's leave on that positive note. We will call it a day. Just some quick housekeeping before we go. We will likely be back again next week for another episode, continuing our breakdown of the Twins minor league year in review. Until then, we appreciate things that y'all can do to support the show, whether that's downloading episodes on your podcast platform of choice. You can also find us on YouTube at Destination the Show. If you want to get in touch with us, you can find us on Twitter at DTS_pod1, or you can send us an email. And that's destinationtheshow@gmail.com. Thank you guys for supporting the show and the content. We really appreciate it. See you guys next week.